Assalamu alaikum ji. Welcome to another podcast by Prime on tariff policy, National Tariff Policy. I have with me today Saud Bangash, Resident Director of Pakistan Business Council. Welcome to our podcast, Saud.
Pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited about discussing national tariff policy with you. Abhi पिछले last 2 weeks जो है हमने we spoke to an expert who was formerly with government. He had a very different angle on the policy. Then we also had a chat with Senator Zishan Khanzada, and we got some sense of what the political establishment is also thinking. So I'm really now very keen to speak to you about what the business establishment is thinking. So I imagine that you were part of the original conversation when the tariff policy was being formulated. Does the government take the Pakistan Business Council into confidence when it is doing or formulating such documents?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, not so much. And we kind of found out about the tariff policy once it was published. But preceding the policy, BBC has consistently and always does give its opinions and recommendations to the government as part of different documents that we publish. So as part of those, we had always and consistently advocated implementing cascaded, tariffs,
Yes.
so that there's a vertical harmony between the tariffs.
That's the main feature of the tariff policy.
That is.
Yeah,
and we welcomed it when it came out because it was implementing exactly that recommendation.
I see. So, I mean, there are arguments against cascading as well, but broadly speaking, do you think that the cascading policy as was proposed by the National Tariff Policy has been implemented, and does the Pakistan Business Council feel that we now exist in a tariff regime jahan pe generally cascading principles adhere hote hain?
Well, that's, almost a leading question, and I think we know the answer to it.
Right.
Because, we haven't really seen a true implementation of the stated objectives of the policy, which we are kind of, if anyone has a chance to read through it, you could find that there's 3 or 4 stated objectives. Right. One is to not use the policy as a revenue measure, or not use tariffs rather as a revenue measure, to have a horizontal, to have a vertical kind of a structure in terms of cascading. So that is another one. And then there's also 2 objectives. One which relates to protecting infant businesses. So to the extent of giving protection, strategic protection it's termed. And then the 4th one is about import substitution and how to give time-bound
concessions
to businesses or industry or what have you, to help those kind of become more sustainable. So these are 3 or 4 things which I mentioned in the policy. But to answer your question, implementation-wise, the past 3 or 4 years we've seen, we'll be talking about that more, I assume. We've seen that the principles of the policy haven't really shown up.
So, just for the viewers, I mean, I would like to explain कि cascading जो है generally क्या होती है. Cascading होती है जब आप inputs के ऊपर जो शुरू के अंदर आते हैं manufacturing process के या creation process के inputs के ऊपर कम tariffs लगाते हैं, और फिर progressive steps जो होते हैं जैसे कि intermediate stage या finished stage उसके ऊपर ज़्यादा लगाते हैं tariffs. Saud Sahab, why does the Pakistan Business Council prefer a cascading tariff policy compared to कि एक single rate जो है वो apply कर दिया जाए throughout the value creation process?
For the simple reason that as you moving up the value chain and in terms of value addition, तो उस लिहाज से then you are for your inputs, kind of providing a passage. Should any manufacturing outfit require to import certain inputs to put into production, they are able to do that at a cheaper duty rate.
Right.
And then as you move to intermediates, there's obviously lesser value addition left to be done. So that almost gives a kind of a structure whereby you are wishing for the economy to import more inputs and not as many finished goods because they are a cost to the economy.
अभी we were talking about with previous guests, हमने ये चीज़ discuss की कि Pakistan uses tariffs as a revenue measure. Very straightforward understanding, maybe estimates of around almost 50% of total revenue till 30 to 50% of total revenues जो है tariff से raise कर जाते हैं. What is your thought on that? Is this wise policy? Is this even acceptable?
I mean, that is something we've been talking about consistently. Also, in addition to cascading, is not to use tariffs as a revenue measure,
Right.
Simply for the fact that it is a tax on the economy, an additional tax on the economy, right? And so what you're doing is that by applying duty tariffs, you are automatically making the cost of production more expensive, right? Now there are down the road, I'm assuming there will be a question as to why I do have tariffs at all, right? Because if it's not to be a revenue measure or a measure to curtail imports in times of a very difficult external account situation like we had a couple of years ago, those were the two main applications,
Sure.
right? So then why does one have tariffs, and why do other countries in the world apply tariffs, right? So the way I look at it is, obviously it is a tool which countries use in an ideal environment in specific situations whereby they want to protect a certain segment of the economy from external inflows. They may not be competitive enough, or they may not have a comparative advantage in a certain space where it feels that the country feels that it has to develop some capacity. So it tries to fend itself to a certain degree. Of course, we live in an international trading system, so keeping in line with those agreements that and frameworks that are overseen by the World Trade Organization. But keeping within those bounds, the tariff bounds, the countries use those levers to adjust to certain economic realities. So it is more of a time and space kind of intervention that a country makes.
So
that seems to be the...
Correct me if I'm wrong. So you would be in favor of a policy that supports import substitution, or would support concessions for infant industries? Generally, is the Pakistan Business Council in alignment with those kinds of ideas? Because there is a certain amount of experts would say that the government should not pick winners and choosers, and that when we do so, we kind of actually make things more complicated for ourselves and create distortions that would not otherwise exist.
So I think that's a great question, and to be very, very candid and fair, it's the conundrum which not just Pakistan, perhaps countries like Pakistan find it's
a lot of developing countries.
A lot of developing countries, and maybe not even developing countries, right?
Right.
Not to digress too much, but you would be aware that the US did put tariff barriers
with China
in 2018. We'll speak about that more.
Yep.
But it's not just the developing countries, it's also the developed countries.
Right.
Now, how the Pakistan Business Council sees the entire spectrum is from both sides, right? So we do recognize that if you want to have a good, healthy production function which allows allocative efficiency in the economy, you want the market to work well, right? Which means that you don't want distortions. You want the market to make choices based on its ability to compete, right?
Yes.
And produce goods at the lowest cost possible, with the most productive labor, right? With the least amount of regulatory costs, with cheap energy, right?
Right.
And with good infrastructure, with good transportation, right? And low freights. So all of that combines into the eventual production cost.
Correct.
Right. Now, when it comes to import substitution, where we see ourselves is that where Pakistan stands, obviously we are struggling with our comparative advantage, particularly our energy cost, our infrastructure, transportation. Would one expect Pakistan to move up the technology curve, to bring efficient industry to bring in new technology into our industry by its own? It's a good question. It seems that unless we fix our house, right, in terms of all the things that I've described, be it our regulatory environment, be it our energy situation, the cost of power, unless we are able to fix that, to give a fair playing field for a player in the market,
Yes.
be it small, medium, large,
Right.
to really run a business, expecting that the market will automatically, by magic, kind of perform and produce that output that we really want from it is kind of seems to be a bit of a tough kind of proposition, which is why we've had this difficult conversation over the decades. To name a few, like there's the auto industry has been in the spotlight, right?
That's right.
And we've also, we've recently seen the example of smartphone manufacturing.
That's right.
We can
now solar panels.
I'm sorry?
And now solar panels.
Now solar panels. So we can talk more about those specific examples of why some things haven't worked and maybe some have worked. But I mean, that's one side of the story. So import substitution becomes somewhat of a necessity because when some things have to be brought to the country in terms of production. PVC has been promoting the fact that, fine, if the government wants to give concessions or incentives, it should be for a very specific time,
right,
for a very specific, against very specific targets.
इसको हम बिल्कुल इस तरह कहते हैं कि जैसे सनसेट क्लॉज होना चाहिए इस तरह की पॉलिसी के ऊपर. बट जितना टाइम गवर्नमेंट एक कंसेशनरी पॉलिसी देती है किसी इंडस्ट्री को, the more it feels invested in the success of it. और वो कभी कभार सक्सेस आ ही नहीं रही. अब ऑटोमोबाइल इंडस्ट्रीज के ऊपर से भी जब कंसेशंस रिमूव किए जाएंगे तो and the industry might collapse,
Right.
So then it'll still be the government's fault and they would have spent so much money on the issue. अच्छा, जनरली प्राइम जो है ना, एक बात जो है वो करता है कि इम्पोर्ट सब्स्टिट्यूशन की जगह ग्लोबल वैल्यू चेन का हिस्सा जो है वो पाकिस्तान को बनाया जाए. आई वुड लाइक टू गेट योर थॉट्स ऑन दैट कि instead of making finished goods that other countries also make very well, there are of course intermediary services that can be provided, intermediary services and goods that can be provided by countries like us,
yes,
which might not be as sophisticated as the finished product but at the same time vital to its success. तो आप इसके बारे में किस तरह सोचते हैं? अभी भी जो है गवर्नमेंट में से एक एटलीस्ट वॉइस ज़रूर आता है कि हम अगर अपने इम्पोर्ट्स को सस्ता करें तो फिर हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स बढ़ सकेंगे, अदरवाइज वो भी एक रिस्ट्रिक्शन जो है वो हमें हिंडर करती है हमारी कॉस्ट ऑफ बिजनेस.
बिल्कुल. पहले तो मैं जो मेरा पिछला पॉइंट था उसका एक करोलरी भी एक्सप्लेन कर दूं कि एक तरफ तो ये बात है कि जो है ना हम कॉस्ट की बात करते हैं, इम्पोर्ट सब्स्टिट्यूशन की बात करते हैं. कॉस्ट चूँकि बहुत हाई है तो हम कहते हैं कि ठीक है, आप कुछ मुद्दत के लिए, जैसे मैंने कहा, आप एक इंसेंटिव दें, बस उसको ख़त्म करें. ये बाकी ममालिक में भी हुआ है. फॉर एग्ज़ाम्पल इंडिया का अपना एक प्रोग्राम है जिसके बारे में हम बात कर लेंगे. मगर दूसरी तरफ ये है कि कस्टमर को वैल्यू मिल रही है कि नहीं.
बिल्कुल
राइट. क्योंकि जो मार्जिनल जो यूटिलिटी है ऑफ टू अवेलेबल टू द कंज्यूमर, दैट हैज़ टू बी मैक्सिमाइज्ड.
जी.
राइट. नाउ आइदर दैट विल हैपन, और उसका क्या मतलब है कि कस्टमर को लोएस्ट कॉस्ट पे बेस्ट वैल्यू मिले.
बिल्कुल.
राइट. क्या हम एज एन इकोनॉमी कंज्यूमर को लो कॉस्ट पे प्रोडक्ट दे रहे हैं? और लो कॉस्ट डजंट हैव टू बी आइदर फुली इम्पोर्टेड और आइदर फुली लोकल. इट कैन बी अ ब्लेंड.
Yes.
बट देयर हैज टू बी दैट ऑप्टिमल पॉइंट whereby you achieve that highest utility point.
And it seems कि we have missed that mark.
We're not even close to it. Let's put it that way. ठीक है ना. उसकी वजह ये है कि जो है ना हमारी जो पॉलिसी है, पर्टिकुलर डिलीशन पॉलिसी है. अगर मैं स्मार्टफोन मैन्युफैक्चरिंग की बात करूं तो उसमें फॉर एग्जांपल अराउंड 2016-17 में बांग्लादेश ने अपनी स्मार्टफोन लोकलाइजेशन की पॉलिसी दी, जिसमें उन्होंने CKDs के ऊपर जो है ना 1% ड्यूटी लगाई. और 0% भी वैट लगाया। SKDs के ऊपर उन्होंने 10% जो है ना ड्यूटी लगाई, 5% वैट लगाया, कैस्केड किया उसको, ठीक है। और नतीजतन उनके पास 2018 में सैमसंग सेटअप अ प्लांट, ठीक है। हमने उनको देख के हमने अपनी पॉलिसी दी, ठीक है, जिसमें हमने जो है ना SKDs और CKDs को एक ही बैंड में रखा। इसका मतलब यह है कि हमने SKDs को प्रमोट किया, बिकॉज अगर आपको एक ही बैंड CKD SKD का मिले तो मैन्युफैक्चर या असेंबलर जो है वो पहले SKD ही शुरू करेगा ना,
राइट,
ठीक है। मगर हमने अपने पॉलिसी में सिर्फ 1 साल का वो दिया, परफॉर्मेंस मेट्रिक दिया या परफॉर्मेंस टारगेट दिया, विच वाज बाय ईयर 1 टू लोकलाइज द पैकेजिंग। तो अगर आप स्मार्टफोन पॉलिसी हमारी देखें तो उसमें ये लिखा हुआ है क्लियर कि आफ्टर 1 ईयर देन वी विल गिव द रिमेनिंग टारगेट्स,
राइट।
तो उसका मतलब ये है कि हमारी जो पॉलिसी है उसने पाथ नहीं दिया कि आपने पहले साल ये करना है, दूसरे साल ये करना है, तीसरे साल, जिस तरह इंडिया ने दिया है,
ठीक है।
इंडिया ने अपने स्मार्टफोन मैन्युफैक्चर पॉलिसी में पहला साल का दिया है कि ये आइटम्स होंगे, ये डिलीट होंगे, उसके बाद इनका जो टैरिफ है वो लो हो जाएगा, उसके बाद ये वाले आइटम्स होंगे, ये होंगे, फिर अगले साल, दूसरे साल, फिर तीसरे साल, फिर चौथे साल। सो इट गिव्स यू अ 4-year program
and brings a lot of certainty, a lot of predictability, and you know how to behave,
right?
Yep.
So it is not intended to be a journey which the government and the private sector are taking together. It is more intended to be in an ideal situation, a target framework which the government gives and says, this is what I'm offering, you take it or you leave it, that's your choice as an investor.
And मतलब कि last minute पे changes भी हो सकते हैं, ad hocism है, whatever the bureaucracy decides, you got to do them.
Well, talk about implementation.
Right.
Is it being implemented well or not? So the point I'm making here is that import substitution being one concept may have its benefits.
Right.
Because other countries have used it, but is it possibly also the weakness of implementing, policies in a robust way,
correct,
which may have actually shed a bad or not as good a light on import substitution.
I mean, there is always that argument, Saud, but then, when you keep making the same mistake over and over again, and it doesn't lead to the results that we intended it to, ये होता जा रहा है कि हमारी गवर्नमेंट जब भी पॉलिसी में इंडल्ज करती है तो वो अनसर्टन
circumstances. So this is what I'm saying exactly, is that we have to be very objective, not supporting one or the other, but जो हमारे actual on the ground चीज़ें हैं या situation है उसको objectively analyze करना चाहिए कि हमारी weaknesses कहाँ पे हैं और कहाँ पे नहीं है, ठीक है। जहाँ तक import substitution की बात है वो मैंने already अपनी एक वजाहत कर ली कि उसमें consumer value is critical. Is the consumer getting good quality? And not getting good quality because of not being offered products from the international market which could have been imported, or even in that case raw materials which could have been brought in to produce that product in a more efficient manner in the country through investments.
Right.
So all of those things are very valid, and PBC recognizes the entire field as it stands.
How would the PBC be critical of government policy? What do you think is the problem with how we are doing things? Because you mentioned implementation, so I'm seeing that maybe you believe that we have the right policies, but they're not being implemented well.
Absolutely. So I think I'm being far from diplomatic.
All right.
Because I am stating that we do recognize the value in bringing high-tech industry, right? Efficient industry. So efficiency-seeking investments, should they be attracted? Many a times you have to give them a certain period to get settled, right? So if that's be it X amount of years that is needed, be it 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7, 8, set that frame, set that target, and then stick to it.
Right.
It in no way would the PBC be supporting a policy which is perennial in nature. Right? And we do recognize that even after 30 years of giving a policy for the auto sector, and again, the new policy, there have been multiple policies, but kind of we saw a shift in that policy somewhere around 2016 when the revised policy came and there was a focus on exports.
Right.
So but it came about 20 years into the whole kind of...
Too late.
Well, call it late or early, that's subjective, but 2 decades is a good amount of time to foster localization.
Right.
And as things stand today, even to this day, as per our calculation, and this is not diplomatic, please do recognize, I think the cost of a car, right, I think about 11% of that is localized.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
So that's quite little, right? And we would have wished to see a lot more. Some may argue that no, 26% has been localized. But if you factor in the imported cost of energy,
right,
and the imported cost of conversion that comes after the items that have to be assembled are imported, then it goes to about 88% imported. Right.
All right.
So it's about 11.5% is local content. So it's very little.
So in about 100 to 200 years, we should be able to manufacture.
This is exactly the argument, is that no, that's not how it should be. And this is not how countries who have done well, who are doing well in our neighborhood, this is not how they're doing it. They have a better regimen. They have a more kind of sure path that's given to any investor, right, who comes in, and they stick to the path, and hence they see results.
How would you describe the present tariff regime? So we have the policy, and then we have the implementation regime. How are you seeing these things working together? Do you think that under the present tariff regime, there is any possibility of improving our trade deficit statistics and improving exports? Or do you think that we're far away from it? Because there is, of course, that electricity cost part of the equation that needs to be addressed. But then apart from that, do you think that the tariff policy has it in itself to give you a competitive export market?
At the moment, it doesn't look like it. Right? And the simple reason for that is that when we earlier spoke about the US barriers on China, that has shifted the global trade landscape, right?
Right.
And with those measures in which the US imposed about 25% duty on about 240 billion worth of imports, and then another 15% on another 112, so 350 odd. There was tariff barriers raised, and then another 100 plus 150 odd were kind of in the list of possibly getting more.
Yeah.
So what that did was that completely triggered an out-migration of production from China, right? And countries such as Vietnam, Egypt, Bangladesh, I can keep throwing out names.
Yeah.
Those countries were able to, Ethiopia were able to attract Chinese manufacturing to their countries. And out of that, because of that change.
Right.
But I think the prerequisite for that also is that, what are the tariffs that the country is offering, right? Say these countries, obviously, if you look at, it's in the tariff policy, which is about 4 or 5 years old. I'm assuming the numbers would have varied, but our net weighted average tariff is about 12.9 odd %,
right,
which is almost double to South Asia, almost 4 times that of the global average.
That's an interesting.
And one of the goals given in the tariff policy is that Pakistan will reduce its net average tariff.
To reasonably competitive.
Right. So if China is producing in Pakistan, a country, a Chinese company, or maybe another country, well, they will look at the import tariffs, that regime that the country is offering.
That's right.
Now, one could argue that under a free trade agreement, the country could specifically give benefits to that particular country. But I mean, if you look at the world in whole, you have to look at the bigger picture, right? So as an economy, why is Pakistan charging 12.9% net weighted average? There has to be something different, right, in Pakistan.
Yeah.
And the different is that our macroeconomic situation is not ideal, right? But we have to manage that. To come to your question, which was should we expect exports to, kind of work? Well, they will work once we start competing with the world. And if the world is able to attract investments and, kind of industries that are relocating, if they're able to attract those to come into their country, they have a better chance at doing better at exports and tying into the global value chains. We, at the moment, don't seem to be there. And, our tariff policy, the objectives at least in the 2019 document were somewhat aligned because it talked about reducing the net weighted tariff, but that never happened because there seems to be a kind of a discord between the different institutions within the departments of government, whereby one is focusing on revenue, the other is giving the stated goals, both are not talking to each other. So it's a bit of, there's a lot more work to be done.
बिल्कुल ये बड़ा मसला है कि we have that whole commerce ministry की regime है, which is supposed to be in charge of, this part of policy, but instead हम refer end पे finance ministry और FPR को करते हैं, and उनकी जो revenue considerations हैं, they end up taking more precedence over the requirements of policy. I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I would even argue कि पाकिस्तान के जो fundamentals हैं economics के वो ठीक हैं, but it's just that the government keeps getting itself into very strange positions जिसकी वजह से because it controls a part of the economy, it puts the whole economy under the rail.
If you take out debt from the equation,
बिल्कुल, foreign.
and if you take out a lot of the extraneous government expenditures, you'll be left with the true picture of the economy.
Yeah.
So it's just that we're spending so much extra. The public sector is spending so much extra.
So much.
And we're relying so much on debt, which then we have to service.
Yes.
Our inflows are not enough to even sustain the kind of expenses we're making as a country. And then, of course, there's an argument that we can't even foot our import bill.
That's right.
Right, with the kind of foreign exchange reserves we have. And then that begets the question is that, if you reduce the trade barriers or by reducing the tariffs, what will happen? I think we're just stuck in that kind of vicious circle. And but I think we need to break out of it should we wish to be part of a global trading system and grow as other countries do, and how they move up the technology chain and how their income per capita increases over time. I think we need to fix the house.
Definitely, there's something like fundamentally flawed with Pakistan policy approach. I think one of the things is, of course, कि जो आपका oil imports होते हैं, basically that imported dollar spending is kind of converted into rupee revenue by the government when it sells that oil with the sales tax, and that's becoming the main source of revenue, I think, has been the main source of revenue for the government in the past. I would like to talk about special economic zones.
Can I interject?
Please.
You had one great question which I didn't answer.
Ji.
You would remember you asked me about, and then you can come to your next question, about the global value chain.
Global value chain.
Right? And whether was it that we should make finished products or partly make some part of the product?
Bilkul. Instead of, working on import substitution and working on finished goods, should we not be indulging ourselves?
Of course. And again, great question, right? And the point is not about making finished goods. And if you're talking about high-tech products, the value of those products are so high, you can't even expect to make the finished good, right? And that's how the global value chains are working, right? And now I'm not talking about making, a low-value toy or making, some of the legacy industries that we see around the world. I'm talking about making electronics, making, refrigerators, televisions, phones, this, what have you. Now, I mean, the thing is that different parts of those products are made in different parts of the world. And then they come together to be pieced together in one place and then be sold as a product.
Right.
Right. So, in no way can a country adopt a particular product to make it all by itself.
Right.
It just doesn't happen. I mean, there's too much knowledge involved. There's too much investment involved. Right. There's too much skill involved. Right? So what happens is typically countries will pick up one, or they'll be given, or they'll prove themselves worthy or good enough to make that one component, two components in that product, and then ship it out. Right. So that's where the concept of toll manufacturing also comes. Like, you'd be aware that in more recent times, whilst there was once Japan, which was making a lot of electronics, then they shifted some industry to Singapore, and now it's moved on to Malaysia. Right? And those could be pieces of the bigger puzzle, right? Smaller components of the bigger product.
Right.
But Pakistan, if we had to, I mean, by import substitution, one doesn't necessarily mean like the entire product. It could be, if we are able to even capture a bit of that bigger product, right, we'll still become part of the value chain, right? So it takes effort, it takes thinking, it takes commitment, right? And I think that commitment, that understanding, hopefully will find its way to the policy level, whereby we are able to formulate policies which actually see through into the future. Right. Something that again goes to speak about the earlier point about how our policies are half cooked.
I think also there's a certain level of experimentation that must be allowed within the economy to kind of figure out that what we need to do, because really the calculations as far as what becomes a valuable product that Pakistan can export and what doesn't is a matter of it is a complex matter, and maybe too complex for planners to kind of really get to the bottom of. And so, Prime has in the past been constantly arguing that Pakistani products must be given birth to or must emerge in highly competitive environments, which is why, the tariff regime needs to be more towards the open trade side.
Absolutely. I mean, when we talk about allocative efficiency, we're talking about the market working.
Yeah.
And that is the best way, because no one can tell the market what to do. Right. And there's so many smart people in this country who are looking to do smart things.
Right.
But the question is, why are they not able to? Right?
That's right.
It's just that base layer which the government needs to fix. Right. Give people the environment where they can make choices.
That's right.
Right. And then let them make the choice whether they want to make a hat or a smartphone or this or that. They will bring in that project themselves. Right.
That's right.
So
the freedom to do business.
Freedom, right?
Yeah.
But a policy generally gives the idea of the future.
Right.
That this is the direction we want to go in.
Yeah.
Right. For example, without belaboring the point, India has an electronics policy in place since 2012. And then they had a revised version in 2017. Right. And what the policy simply states is that if India is not able to localize, for example, the smartphone, it will have to pay an X amount of dollars, which is a big amount, a few $1 billion, out to import that product.
Right.
So the policy says now's the time to localize it to prevent that burden
future
on the economy.
Right.
So it gave the signal to the market that this is a need of the economy. And hence, obviously, I mean, whoever is investing is not the government, it's the private sector. But it identified that need.
So taking forward the idea about being part of the global value chain or concessions for industries that are emerging and import substitution, special economic zones ka concept jo hai, it's been around for a while. Actually, there is the concept of the export processing zones which fall under the Export Processing Zones Authority, and then you also have the SEZs that were part of CPEC.
Right.
So SEZs, export promotion zones, especially are more like tariff related to the tariff concessions, जो है वो automatically मिल जाया करती हैं, and like the whole area is designed, or at least supposed to be designed, in a way that that supports the exporting process or manufacturing for exports wali process. However, we don't see any really good success stories as far as the export processing zones are concerned. What are your thoughts on that? Is the Pakistan Business Council supportive of zones that have special privileges and concessions, or do you think that the tariff policy and even taxes should be uniform throughout the country?
I think when it comes to the zones, I mean, that concept obviously picked up. I mean, we have so many different types of zones. Like you have export processing, you have industrial zones,
Science, technology ones.
we have. I mean, there's a plethora of them. But we've seen that the special economic zone, which was actually inspired by the Chinese model.
That's right.
Right. Basically, with the expected Chinese investment, perhaps the planners were of the opinion that we should have similar zones so that, all countries can come. But it was primarily kind of in those days tied in with the CPEC investment, which was expected more recently.
That's right.
Right. In those days. However, then, there was a bit of the plans as they were to have one zone in each province. And there was about 7-8 zones. Now, coming to the concept, right? So I completely endorse your view. Zones, if you look at it, are typically geared for export.
Right.
I mean, that's the need, right? Primary need, right? Of course, import substitution is always a question which we've already discussed, right? But the idea is to enable the country to generate enough foreign exchange to help it sustain its economy, right? Be it by cutting out the additional expense it would have made, for example, on edible oil, or to be able to actually export. I think the intent has to be very clear. We, as a country, need to decide that, if we want to put in place a zone, right, will it be like only export focused, right? Or will it be 80-20? For example, the special economic zone, you had to export, the industry had to export, manufacturing unit had to export 80%, and it could sell 20% of the local market.
Right.
I mean, if you talk about a purely export zone, which is totally fair because China did it that way, right? So from what I gather, the Shenzhen zone, which was first,
more close to the special economic zones, right?
Yeah. So I mean, the Shenzhen was one special economic zone. They started with one, which was situated at the port.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
For easier trade.
Yes.
Right. And the whole idea was that you have a manufacturing house and then you're just sending, stuff out. I think if we follow a similar idea, I think it won't be a bad idea in the sense that instead of kind of making it too kind of complicated in terms of like, okay, one can export this much and also sell locally. I think we need to have a kind of a focus whereby we need to get these exports out. Right. And if it makes administration easier to manage that zone in that way, then be it. Right? But as long as we achieve a certain objective, and in this case, if it's just exports, then it has to be exports. And for that purpose, if it has to be called an export processing zone, then that's fine.
Take care.
Right? The name doesn't matter. I think what matters is what will make it happen. Now, be it tariff concessions, right? Because that was the model, you're right, like 10 years, zero duty on machine import, primarily, right? And then, of course, there was another clause whereby there will be no minimum tax. The whole indirect taxes is another discussion that we can have some other time.
Yeah,
but like have no minimum tax and then have the minimum tax, implementation was again a problem.
Yeah.
right? And a lot of, well, at least some of the companies who came to manufacture there had this concern that in the policy it was stated no minimum tax, and then actually minimum tax was being imposed on them,
Right.
on turnover.
Right.
So I think policy consistency is another big one, which we should not miss. Beyond the tariff concession, what is a prerequisite is that you're providing, or the country is providing, all the requisite facilities, right? So it has to be a plug-and-play regime. So you're bringing in the electricity, you're bringing in the gas, you're bringing in the roads, you're bringing in, whatever a business needs to function, you're bringing in the access to the port.
And this is not working, right? Because the electricity is not there, and it's not cheap, and the gas is not there, and it's not cheap.
Right.
So
I mean, what I'm saying is, it'll work, hopefully, if we actually do what we intend to do. Right. But we haven't really gotten to what we intend to do. We've put out, it seems like we as a country, I'm speaking, we put out the plan, but again, it's not implemented that way.
We as a government, I find, because I think policies आ रही हैं government से, experts के stakeholders के साथ मिलते जुलते चीजें बना भी लेते हैं, but at the end it's about the implementation, and the government keeps changing its position. Keeps changing its
and as a country, I meant primarily the primary actor, which is the
government. Are there some clear opportunities that the BBC sees for business growth in Pakistan, considering all the policies that are in place right now? Do you think that there are some winner industries, for example, or certain types of businesses that might do well in the next 10, 15 years?
That's a great question. And I was really hoping you'll come to this question, yeah? Because, again, what it comes to is there's two things. One is, can you pick winners? We've already discussed that.
Yep.
Most likely not. Right? The second thing is, if you can't pick winners, are there areas which, given the handicaps that we have, which is primarily the cost of production, we've already discussed that, right? Which is a fact. Our comparative advantage vis-a-vis the world is like not very great, right? So the question is, then do we is there anything that we can do from the policy side which will help us move forward?
Yeah.
Right? While keeping the main principle intact. There is a possibility that we as the country again, and primarily the government getting to do it, institute a policy which gives some direction, right? Which are the key sectors which have the potential for us to work on as a country, be it from a futuristic point of view or be it from a local content point of view, right? Because there's only the way that we can improve our comparative advantage is to focus on areas which have lesser imported content and more local content. Even if there is an imported content, as long as it's, lesser than more.
मतलब आप कह रहे हैं कि vertically integrated सी थोड़ी हो value chain.
हाँ, मतलब कि आप imported cost कम हो, local cost ज़्यादा.
Local cost.
Because उस पे आपको comparative advantage मिलेगा.
पैसे भी ज़्यादा बचेंगे.
पैसे, obviously value wise वो बेहतर होगा, give you advantage, right? और उसकी eventual price will be more competitive around the world, right? So वो कौन से areas हैं, right? उस पे हम तबसरा कर सकते हैं, बट उसके लिए पॉलिसी ज़रूर होनी चाहिए, बिकॉज हमारे मुल्क में अभी तक कोई इंडस्ट्रियल पॉलिसी वजह नहीं हुई कि हमें कौन से एरियाज में कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज है, कितना है, क्यों है, कैसे है, उन सब चीज़ों को क्लैरिफाई करना चाहिए. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, वी आर ऑलवेज कोटेड एज एन एग्रीकल्चरल कंट्री, राइट? बिकॉज दैट इज़ वन ऑफ द की इनपुट्स वी हैव. कपास की बात होती है, कपास का तो आपको पता है हमारी क्या स्टोरी थी कि मतलब जो था भी लाइक 14 मिलियन बेल्स हमारा एक ज़माने में होते थे, उससे हम कम होके अभी ऑलमोस्ट आधे पे भी आ गए जी, राइट? इंस्टेड ऑफ कि हम उसमें प्रोडक्टिविटी बढ़ाते, उसमें हमारी कम हो गई है, ठीक है, क्योंकि हमने प्रॉपर उसमें जो प्रॉपर सीड था वो नहीं डिप्लॉय किया. तो ये सारी चीज़ें फिर पॉलिसी से ही आएंगी ना, एक क्लैरिटी से आएंगी. So agriculture is one area which we should definitely leverage. एग्रीकल्चर में न सिर्फ क्रॉप्स नहीं होते और उनकी वैल्यू एडिशन बहुत क्रिटिकल है. जो वो है, उसके अलावा आपका पोल्ट्री है, उसके अलावा आपका मीट है.
हाँ,
राइट.
हॉर्टिकल्चर भी होगा,
आपका हॉर्टिकल्चर है, हाई वैल्यू क्रॉप्स. ठीक है ना. कंट्रीज लाइक ब्राज़ील एंड इंडिया आर एक्चुअली एक्सपोर्टिंग फ्रोजन बीफ. हमारा अभी थोड़ा बहुत कुछ शुरू हुआ है फ्रोजन सेगमेंट, बट मोस्टली चिल्ड रहा है, और वो भी मिडिल ईस्ट तक. राइट. सो दिस थिंग्स दैट कंट्रीज आर डूइंग अराउंड द वर्ल्ड, उसमें हमारे कंपैरेटिव एडवांटेज बन सकता है. उसको हमें सिर्फ एक उजागर करना है और उसको फॉलो थ्रू करना है. बट उसके अलावा आपको पता है कि हमारे माइंस एंड मिनरल्स इज अनदर एरिया जिसमें हमारे अपने रिजर्व्स हैं. बट उसकी कन्वर्जन कैसे होगी? उसको हमने हमें कतन उसको एज रॉ इन कमोडिटी फॉर्म तो उसको हमें नहीं एक्सपोर्ट करना.
आई थिंक वो पॉसिबल ही नहीं है उसको प्रोसेस करना अनलेस द गवर्नमेंट गेट्स आउट ऑफ द बिजनेस इटसेल्फ.
राइट. बट अगेन पॉइंट बीइंग कि आपने कहा कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं.
ये कर
सो मार्केट हैज टू वर्क, द मार्केट एजेंट्स हैव टू वर्क, एंड देन उसके अलावा बियॉन्ड दैट, in order to get us out of this kind of existing situation we have, there's some areas which should be prioritized by the government, and which should be given priority in terms of the local content that those areas offer.
Now we've talked mostly about the tariff policy, और मैं ना थोड़े से different subjects के ऊपर जाना चाह रहा हूँ. One of them, of course, is the value of industrial clusters that can support businesses. But I think उससे पहले अगर tariffs के करीब की बात की जाए तो do you think that the government has the right approach towards big and small businesses? There's a lot of talk in the government about the small and medium enterprise sector growing. However, we see that there's a lot of barrier to ease of business for those side of the at the same time, for the larger businesses, there's a super tax. Effectively, I think 55%, 50% तक तो earnings जो है वो किसी ना किसी फॉर्म में taxes के अंदर निकल जा रही है. Larger organizations.
Conservative, by the way.
Yeah.
It's more than that.
It's more than that.
Right.
So, what is this super tax, and why did the Pakistan Business Council not oppose it, and other trade associations oppose it to the extent that it would, not make its way? It's really distortive, don't you believe?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Rest assured that PBC has, advised the government that this is, anti-market, anti-business.
Yes.
You can't expect businesses to grow when your effective tax is about 70+%. And that's counting in a lot of different things. You have the corporate tax, and then on companies which have earnings of more than 150 million, which is actually, in today's economy, not a very big number.
Not a big number.
So then you're adding another 10%, so that's 39%.
Yeah.
Then there's on the first payout that the corporate makes, there's 15% tax on dividend. And then the individual who gets the dividend gets taxed another 15%.
Yeah.
So just add them on and we're at 70.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of tax. And you must have noticed that in the most recent budget, now there's also a kind of a super tax on individuals.
Yeah.
So for those who are earning more than 10 million a year, there's another 10% income tax. So effective tax rate on that person would be 45% plus.
That's right.
There's a fixed amount also. So the thing is that how does that contribute to allocative efficiency?
Not at all, one would think.
Yeah.
Yes.
The simple reason being that if that capital is being redirected into tax money and being spent as we see it, and now we've been talking for the past almost an hour or so about allocative efficiency and how the market needs to function and how it needs to bring that market magic to work.
Yeah.
If you're pulling the steam out of it, what is this going to do? If there's not enough capital left to invest.
That's right.
And that's what the Laffer curve also talks about, is that there's that optimal point
after which diminishing returns.
The capital which was supposed to be invested or find its way into productive means is going to be wasted.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean that's the kind of inefficiency that we're facing.
Right.
And I'll take you back to my earliest point where I talked about take the debt out and take the extra expenses out of government.
Right.
And you'll actually see where the economy stands. And that's really where we should be, right? So we really need to cut the size of expenses that we're incurring on
public.
In the public sector, but also the public sector involving itself into the market so much, whereby it's actually in the business of doing business.
Right. Purely unproductive expenses that are mostly related to the monitoring and regulation of the economy. But really, when we look at public sector organizations, they're overstaffed and they're dealing with a lot of inefficiency issues. I think, Saud, that is about the amount of time that we have. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I wish that we could continue this conversation further and even diverge a little bit from tariffs, because there is a lot of things to be spoken about when we're talking about trade, when we're talking about what Pakistan can produce. I think you have a great perspective, and you got your finger on the pulse of the business community.
Well, thank you so much. And if you would allow, I would like to just give a sum up of the 2-3 main
Please
things,
do.
Right. So absolutely, I mean, for the next policy that comes in, a lot of it would have to do with the previous policy. And if those principles are adhered to, like not use tariff policy for revenue or not use tariffs for revenue, right?
Right.
To adhere to, the cascading structure, right? To minimize the weighted mean tariff rate,
right,
and bring it, kind of make it competitive with
regional
players, our peer economies or the competitor economies, right? And also to have a well-defined policy, right? By policy in terms of having an industrial policy, to give direction to which areas are more critical for the economy. Should there be a need for giving some push and without being too kind of involved, and then also adhering to when one goes into a specific sector to incorporate a new technology, a new industry, like what happened in the smartphone area, give specific timelines and then have a time-bound, performance-based, efficiency-seeking policy and implement it as per its initial intent. So I would say those would be some of the critical areas which I would highlight.
Bilkul, ji, something for the government to think about. I think agar Pakistan ki business community or public bhi jo hai, if there's one thing that we need from the government, it is ke ek certainty ho or ek predictability ho aapki policy ke andar. There are too many changes. Things are changing at every time a government changes, the policy changes. Every time a government official changes, there's a policy change or a change in the way that policies are implemented. It's creating a lot of uncertainty for business, and they cannot operate under these conditions. Abhi jo businesses operate kar rahe hain Pakistan ke andar, they're doing a public service by just staying here because the environment is not conducive. I think over the next few months, we'll be seeing ke जैसे गवर्नमेंट पाकिस्तान ने अनाउंस किया कि डिपार्टमेंट्स 84 जो है उनको राइट साइज करेंगे, कुछ प्राइवेटाइजेशन के ऊपर भी बात हो रही है. थिंग्स कीप starting and failing, but it does seem that the government knows what to do, and it's now about whether it will be able to do it or not. So with that said, Ji, I'll sign off. Thank you so much to Saud for joining us today, and inshallah we'll continue our conversations with PBC and other experts in the days to come. Khuda Hafiz, Ji.